Hey you guys, and welcome back. We are in the middle of an ice storm, so there's not much I can do in my garden. So what I thought I would do with you today is to share with you the seeds that I bought last year and share with you how they actually performed in my garden last year. I don't know about you, but I love seeing people's seed hauls, what they're going to grow for the following year. But I thought it would be fun to talk about those hopeful varieties that I had last year and how they actually performed and whether or not I will choose to grow them again this year. Back in January of last year, I shared several different videos on my Instagram channel of the new varieties and maybe some ones that I'd grown before that I was going to be trying from several different seed companies. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you today is clips of those videos where I talk about my hopes for the particular varieties that I talk about, and then I'm going to come back with you here and share with you how they actually did. Let's start out with Baker Creek Heirloom seeds. I bought several from them, but these are some of the new varieties that I decided to try last year. This first one is a tomato, this pink Fang tomato. This actually I don't think was in the catalog. I think that I bought this because it came as an emailed suggestion, and the reason I wanted to try this is because it is supposed to be a 6-inch long and narrow paste tomato, and I make my paste through my KitchenAid fruit and vegetable strainer attachment mix, and it has kind of a narrow place where you put the tomatoes in, and with San Marzanos they can go straight through, and so can this. And so I thought that would be fun for the paste tomatoes, especially if they get 6 inches long, and it also says that it's pretty meaty. There's only 10 seeds in this pack, so I think it's one they're trying out. It's one of their new varieties, but I'm excited to try this one. Pink Fang was definitely a fun one if you watched my video about paste tomatoes and also about crops that did well in the heat. Pink Fang was one. Now, I didn't get a really good start on a lot of these because I could tell that they didn't like the cold, and so some of them struggled in the early part of the spring, but in the heat they did fantastic. And as far as paste tomato for sauce, very good. I loved how they were long and thin, and they worked really well in my KitchenAid strainer attachment. Perfect for sauce. They didn't have many seeds, which is probably why there weren't many seeds in the seed packet, but I saved as many as I could. I'm definitely going to be growing Pink Fang again this year. The next one is hard to say, but this is actually Motherland Okra. And this is another one that I bought because they emailed me the story behind it, and it was so neat of a story that I had to try it because I love okra and I grow okra. So this one's going to be one you'll just have to look it up yourself and see the story behind it. I can't wait to see what it does in the garden. Motherland Okra was such fun for me to grow, mainly because it grew ginormous. I didn't measure it, but you can see in the picture here that it was quite tall. The problem with Motherland Okra is that even though I live in Arkansas where okra typically thrives, I didn't actually start getting okra until October. And because we had an early freeze in the middle of October, I only got maybe a handful of okra to actually eat. On the good side, they were these cute little knobby looking okra and they tasted fantastic, but I just didn't get enough. They were beautiful to grow in the garden. I loved having them there, but for a production standpoint, I think they're probably better suited for those of you who have even longer growing seasons than I do. The next I have is a new beet variety to me. This is called Ruby Queen, and the reason I bought this was because it's an All-America Selections winner, but it also says that it is a type of beet that's used in the commercial canning industry. And since I pickle my beets and I can my beets, I decided I've got to try this and see if it does well for me in my garden. I thought the Ruby Queen beets did very well. They did similar to the ones that I'm used to doing well, like Early Wonder Tall Top and Detroit Dark Red. Honestly, I couldn't tell a huge difference between them and the others. They did great. I will be growing them again this year. The next one is a Royal Golden Watermelon. I tried Orange Glow last year and I liked it, but this one really intrigued me because supposedly the rind actually turns yellow when it's ripe. If you've ever had trouble trying to figure out when watermelon is ripe, this one would make it pretty easy. So watermelon is my favorite fruit. Why not try growing it? We'll see how it does. Oh, I had such high hopes for this watermelon, but from the very beginning, it just didn't work for me. The seeds didn't germinate when I started them in soil blocks indoors, which you don't have to do, but I like to do to get a jump start of in the gardening season. They didn't germinate, and then I decided to go ahead and direct sow them in the garden when the soil was warm. They didn't germinate either. I always have great success with germination from Baker Creek, so I don't know what the problem was with this particular variety. I am going to try to do them again this year just to see if I can get one coaxed out, because I really wanted some of those, but last year they just didn't work for me. And then they usually send free seeds in every order. This one, I feel like hit the jackpot. I got a yellow carrot. How exciting is that? So I'll definitely be planting that as well. As you saw in the video about my carrot harvest, these carrots were disappointing for the spring to summer harvest because they started to bolt. They were not heat tolerant at all. I learned later they're probably better suited for a fall planting. I had actually planted all of my seed in the spring, so I didn't get to try that. So they were kind of a disappointment for me. In hindsight, I should have planted them in the fall. Probably should have done a little bit more research on that, and then they probably would have been fine, but they didn't work for me last year. The first one here that I ordered is a Napoli Carrot, and this is the first time I've ever grown it, and the reason that I chose it is because it's a short days to maturity carrot, like 55 days. So I thought it would be a good one for a spring planting since we get so hot so fast, and that way I could get some good spring planted carrots. And it would probably work well for fall too, because a lot of times we're rushing to get the carrots mature before the winter sets in and the daylight gets too low. So that's why I chose that particular carrot to go along with some of my other standbys. The Napoli carrot actually did fantastic in my spring to summer planting. I got probably as much out of the Napoli as I did out of my other favorite, New Carota. So I had high hopes for it for the fall. It didn't do as well in the fall, but my whole fall planting didn't do that great. I don't know if I'll try it again for fall again, but I definitely will plant it again for the spring. Next, I have a type of bean called bingo beans. I've never grown them before, but I am so excited about trying these because they are a pole bean that is also a dry bean. A lot of dry beans that I want to grow, they're a bush habit, and in my climate, we have a lot of trouble with pests, and sometimes it's hard for me to get bush beans to come to maturity fast enough before all of our bean pests get to them. And pole beans just do a lot better for me. So this one is a dry bean, and it sounds like it might actually work for a pinto bean or a red bean maybe, which is the main dry beans that I use. And so I'm excited to try this on my A-frame trellis and see if I can get a good harvest of these for my dry beans this year. The bingo bean did well, kind of. And I say that because we had a really quick hot spell that did not do well for any of our beans. We just really had a bad bean year last year. But it grew well enough and it produced well enough that I'm going to be growing it again this year. I'm going to be trying it again. It did grow up the trellis. It was a beautiful bean. We just had a bad bean year last year, so I'm giving it another shot, even though it didn't produce what I hoped it produced last year. I'm hoping this year will be different. Next, I have a Wonder Bell pepper. I've not tried this particular type of pepper before, but the reason I chose it is because it says that it is disease resistant, and I've been having trouble with some diseases on some of my peppers. The California Wonder has done best in the past, so I'll definitely grow that one too, but I wanted to try the Wonder Bell to see if it does better than some of my other ones with the disease. If you listen to my podcast, then you know that last year I had a complete bell pepper fail. I've never had that in 10 years of gardening. I think it was because all of my bell peppers were in an area where there was no shade, and we got really hot last year, more than we've ever gotten in my gardening experience. But all of my bell peppers ended up not doing well, not producing. So I really can't tell you how well it would do under normal circumstances. I am definitely trying it again this year because I feel like last year wasn't a good trial, but I'm not only doing that one, I'm also going to be trialing several different new varieties of bell peppers this year along with that one. The next pepper I have here is the Arapaho Cayenne. I needed a cayenne pepper so that I could grow cayennes. I do this for ground cayenne pepper for my spice cabinet and also for other like herbal remedies and things like that. This one I chose because it's supposed to be a longer cayenne. The fruit's supposed to be longer, like 8 to 9 inches long. So I thought I could get more bang for my buck if I could get some larger cayennes. A lot of the cayennes that I've grown in the past are kind of small, so maybe I can actually get more out of it. That's why I'm trying that one this year. The Arapaho Cayenne lived up to the expectations. It was extremely prolific, a lot of harvest, and yes, much longer cayenne pepper fruit than the typical cayennes that I'm used to growing. For me, that worked out so well because it made it much simpler to be able to dry it and grind it into cayenne pepper. I don't think I'm gonna have to grow cayenne peppers again, at least for another couple of seasons, because of how prolific it was. And I think we had maybe 4 plants. So it was fantastic. I highly recommend it for anyone wanting to grow peppers to grind your own cayenne powder. For tomato, I ordered the Constoluto Fiorentino. I've never grown this before. It's a slicing tomato that is ribbed. I grew a Constoluto Genovese last year and I loved it, but it had some issues in my garden for some reason. I'm not even sure why, but I loved it so much I wanted to try another Constoluto variety, and maybe this one might do a little bit better than the Genovese for me. The Constoluto Fiorentino was a disappointment this year, along with another variety I'll share with you in a little bit. And I think part of it was because I grew it in a 7-gallon grow bag and we had, again, a very hot season. So it did not do very well. I don't remember if I'm gonna try it again. Last year, like I said, I think a lot of it had to do with climate. I don't know that I will try it again in a grow bag. I think it will probably need a little bit of extra room, but it was a disappointment, sadly, for me last year. Where I really think Johnny's shines is their selection of greens. And the first one I'm trying this year is something called an Elegance greens mix. This is a mix of greens that I'll use for salads, and they're in the brassica family, so they actually will be a real quick grower, 21 days I believe, so this will be one of the earliest ones hopefully I can harvest. I loved the Elegance greens mix. It gave a beauty to my green stalk planter, actually I think that's mainly where I planted it, was my green stalk planter, but the purples and the greens and the different textures of this mix, absolutely loved it, and it was really good in a salad. I love my arugula and I love my lettuce, but having this Elegance greens mix to complement it, fantastic. I would highly recommend it. The next one I'm going to try is a Crispino iceberg lettuce. I've never had success with iceberg lettuces in the past because of my Arkansas heat. They just don't have time to head up. But this one is supposed to be better in the heat. We'll see how well we do because my son loves iceberg lettuce. And so I definitely wanted to see if I could try to make that work this year. I had high hopes for the Crispino iceberg lettuce, and it did okay. In my climate, iceberg lettuces are very difficult to grow because we tend to go from cold to hot really fast, and iceberg lettuces require a lot longer of a growing period. In the spring, I planted them in the pockets of my green stalk planter, and they did form heads, but they were kind of small, and I think it probably would have done better in a raised bed or in the garden with a little bit more room than a green stalk would be able to provide, given that it was a head lettuce. And then when it started to get hot, the core of the Crispino lettuce did end up getting a little bit bitter. I planted again in the late summer and in the fall, and the leaves actually of Crispino did really well in the heat. They were not bitter at all, even in the hot part of the summer, but the ones that I let continue to grow into the fall, once they ended up forming a head, they did end up being a little bit bitter. So it kind of worked, it kind of didn't. It's one of those, I don't think I'm gonna grow again this year, but that doesn't mean that I won't return to it. I'll be trying a different head lettuce this year and see if it does any better. The next one I have is a romaine lettuce called Green Forest, and honestly, the thing that first attracted me to this was because I grew up in a town called Green Forest. But it's a romaine lettuce that is a longer season lettuce, I think like 56 days. So this will be one that I'll plant early and then harvest a little bit later in the year. The Green Forest lettuce was one of my favorites for the spring. And one of the reasons is because it was the last lettuce to become bitter in our heat. And we got hot, really hot in May, which is when all of my other lettuces had already gotten bitter and already bolted even into April. But Green Forest lasted the longest. I will absolutely be planting Green Forest again this year. Moving on, I next have bought a specific type of squash called Goldfinch. I've never grown this before, but it's supposed to have a more open habit. So my goal is to possibly let it grow up a tomato cage and hopefully get the leaves off the ground to maybe avoid the squash bugs as long as I can. And it's a pretty early producer, so that will also help. The Goldfinch squash was another that I was absolutely blown away by. I didn't end up growing it up a tomato cage, I just didn't get around to doing that. And so I just let it sprawl and it did fine. What I was most impressed about the Goldfinch was its immense productivity. It gave me so many squash, I didn't know what to do with them all. And it continued to grow a long time up until the squash vine borer killed it, which always happens. And then I replanted for the fall. Again, amazing productivity. I'm highly impressed with the Goldfinch variety. It will absolutely be in my garden this year. I bought a tomato plant from Johnny's this year. I've never grown this before, the Grand Marshal. It is a beefsteak determinate tomato that is supposed to set fruit in the heat. That's my biggest problem with tomatoes in my Arkansas summer heat, is that in the middle of the summer they just don't produce anymore. And I like that this is a determinate tomato, which means it's not going to vine everywhere. It's going to be a little bit more compact, although it sounds like it's going to be large, and it's going to be a beefsteak variety. So we'll see how that goes. It'll be a new one for me. We'll see if it really will handle the heat like it's supposed to. The Grand Marshal tomato, I'm trying to remember. I do recall it growing to a set, like determinate height. It didn't grow all over the place. So it was a good size. I would say about 4 to 5 feet tall. And it did produce quite a few beefsteak type tomatoes early on. It produced and set fruit early on, but then it stopped. Now, whether that's because it was a determinate variety and that's usually what happens, or if that's because the heat set in too early, maybe that's why. They didn't give me a whole lot of production, but it could have been because of the weather. I'm not sure if I'll grow as many as I grew last year. If I grow any this year, it didn't blow me away, but it's definitely one that I wouldn't discount for the future. Next, I have a celery called Tango. This is supposed to also be better in the heat, which is, as you can tell, a problem here. I've grown white Chinese celery and I still grow that. It's a great option. Last year I tried golden self-blanching and it was okay. I'm going to try it again, but then I want to compare it to this one and see if I can get a little bit more out of it compared to the other ones that I've had before. Tango is so far my favorite celery to grow. It did amazing last year. To me, it did better than the white Chinese or the Chinese white. And it handled our heat fairly well. Now, I did plant it underneath my A-frame trellis, so when the beans started growing, it gave it some shade, and harvesting was great. And in fact, the ones that I harvested from, like, to just cut it off at the soil, they ended up growing back, a lot of them did, for a fall crop. So Tango is definitely one I'm growing again. The first one I got was a tomato I've heard great things about. I'm not quite sure if I'm pronouncing this right, but Dr. Wyches Yellow, perhaps. And the reason I'm growing this is because I've really enjoyed having multicolored slicing tomatoes. They make beautiful salsa and bruschetta and things like that. I already have Golden Jubilee, which is my favorite orange, and then I bought a red one. So I'm hoping to have some multicolored slicers for fresh eating. So I'm excited about that one. Dr. Wyches Yellow was like the Constoluto Fiorentino. It did not do well. I planted it in 7-gallon grow bags. It grew fine, and that's something I should specify with the Constoluto Fiorentino. They both grew great, but they did not produce well. And whether that's a function of being in too small of a grow bag or the heat or both, I'm not sure, but I did not get much of a harvest out of that one, just like the other one. I may end up trying to grow it again just because I've heard such great things, but growing it maybe inside a raised bed or a straw bale or something like that with a little bit more moisture and also a little bit more room. And then we can cross our fingers that we don't get heat so fast this year. But last year did not work very well for me. The second I have is a pepper called the Nadapeno pepper. This is supposed to be a jalapeno pepper that doesn't have heat to it. And I'm looking forward to that because I love stuffing jalapeno peppers with cream cheese and cheddar cheese and garlic powder. They're called jalapeno poppers, and sometimes though I eat too many. So I thought this would be fun to have for those stuffed jalapeno peppers. The Nadapeno jalapeno definitely lived up to its name. It was a jalapeno without the heat, and I'm saying we didn't taste any heat whatsoever. The only thing was it was a little bit on the smaller side as far as the fruit, and so stuffing them like I wanted to do with jalapeno poppers was a little bit more cumbersome because it just was a little bit thinner and smaller. But as far as a jalapeno without the heat, it produced well. I grew it in my green stalk and it was a pretty compact plant. I'm definitely growing it again. The next one I got was the red velvet lettuce. I love growing different types of red lettuces. I think they're beautiful in salad mixtures with the greens. The ones that I've tried before have been red romaine and merlot, which I really like. But the Merlot in particular doesn't tend to grow very tall, so I wanted to see if maybe I could get more out of this red velvet lettuce. It just looked really pretty. I really liked the red velvet lettuce. It's hard for me to find red lettuce that is as productive as green lettuce. I'm still on the lookout for that, and the red velvet did well. The only thing I did notice about the red velvet is it was one of the first ones to bolt. Even my fall lettuce that I planted in the fall, and it's been in my greenhouse all winter, it was the first one to start to bolt, and we really haven't gotten warm. So it was good for a while, but then, like I said, it's probably one that I would, when I plant it and plant it again, I will plan to be able to have it in my green stalk, which is where I'm gonna be planting it, and then have a succession coming in behind it, because I know it's one of the first ones that I'll need to take out once it starts to go to seed and get bitter. Compared to a variety like Green Forest that I know can go longer, knowing that about red velvet will help me in my planning, so I can use it and have it, but also know that I can have a plant coming in behind it as well. Each year is a fun year to be able to start something new, and I hope that this look at what I was excited and hopeful for last year, how it actually produced in my garden last year, was a nice little alternative take to a seed haul. But if you're interested in hearing about all the new varieties I'm actually going to be planting and growing for 2023, that video will be for my Patreon community. I would love to have you join. You can join for as low as $5 a month, and we'll put that in the description. I'm really excited about the new ones that I'll be growing this year, along with some of the new favorites that I found from last year, and I'll be sharing with you more on the way. Make sure to like and subscribe for more YouTube videos like this, and again, consider my Patreon community if you want more bonus videos coming your way, and I will see you again on next week's video.